right, thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone, for attending. So I've been doing over the last 5 years researching how you can really understand people from their Google searches. And the idea is that everybody's always lying to you all the time. They're telling you how great everything is. But on Google, they really tell what's really going on in their head, basically how we're all a total mess secretly. So I'll give you an Australian example right off the bat. Since I've been to Australia, 5 people have told me, you know, Australians, we're not like you Americans. We're more laid back. We're more calm. So I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That's exciting. I could use a little calmness in my life. And I looked up on Google search analytics. Australia is the #1 country searching for anxiety problems in the entire world. So you guys might have a calm exterior. You might tell your American friends how you got everything under control. But I know secretly there's a lot of anxiety underneath that calm surface. Underneath all that surfing and the swimming and is some panic. But the research I take, the research I do, sometimes goes to dark, uncomfortable topics that we'd rather not talk about, but I think are really important and could potentially improve society if we really went there and analyzed this data. So I'm doing research now on a clearly important topic, a clearly dark topic, suicide. And it turns out, maybe it's not so surprising, there are millions of searches every month on Google for suicide, commit suicide, how to commit suicide, sad searches. And these searches predict with great accuracy when more people are making these searches, more people commit suicide. So we'd actually potentially be able to intervene and say, hey, there are a lot of searches for suicide in the area. We need to do something about this because some of these people are going to actually take their own lives. And we can actually analyze this data, dig deeper, and know why people think of committing suicide. So I've done analysis where I've looked at what people search for before they search for suicide to kind of give a sense of what's going on in their lives that make people think, I want to take my own life. And I found the #1 complaint prior to a suicidal search is health conditions. More than financial problems or relationship problems, people look for suicide when they've just been diagnosed or are struggling with some health problem. So I dug deeper and said, okay, what health conditions are most likely to be followed by searches for suicide? And the #1 health condition prior to a search for suicide, can anyone guess? It's not particularly surprising. I think someone said depression. So that's not surprising at all. We all know that depression is a major risk factor for suicide. But another health condition right near the top, right near depression, which shocked me and leads people to search for suicide, herpes, the STD. I know, yeah, people are like, what? Wow, really, herpes? And this shocked me because herpes is not a disease that has a lot of physical symptoms. It's not particularly painful. It's not life-threatening at all. But a lot of people, and when you look at the analysis, it's frequently younger people, think of suicide after they get a diagnosis of herpes. And the reason for this is the stigma of the disease. People feel like they're carrying a scarlet letter. And this is obviously a huge problem in society. We don't want to live in a society where people greet this illness because of the stigma with thoughts of suicide. So I dug down even deeper into the data and to kind of understand more about this problem. What else do people search when they search for herpes and suicide? And I found the #1 other search when people just say diagnosed with herpes, think of committing suicide, celebrities with herpes. Which makes sense. People are like, this is maybe a young person, just got diagnosed with herpes, thinking my life is ruined, I have this horrible illness, nobody's gonna love me, I'm never gonna get married, whatever. And then they wanna look for basically some of their heroes who may also have this condition and they can maybe relate to. So I Googled this, celebrities with herpes, to see what came up. And I found out if you search celebrities with just about any illness. If you search celebrities with depression, you'll have a list of 30 celebrities, probably many of your heroes, who will say, I have this condition, I want to lower stigma. Just about any illness this is true for. There are many celebrities kind of out with this illness. Celebrities with herpes, there's basically no celebrity who says, I have herpes. In fact, if you search celebrities with herpes, you'll get a list of celebrities accused of having herpes who vehemently deny it. Not in a million years do I have this horrible disease. And that's kind of, I think, bad, and seriously bad, because now we know, thanks to this Google search data, that there are millions of young people who are diagnosed with herpes, think of committing suicide, search for celebrities with herpes, and instead of getting their heroes saying, I have this is nothing to be ashamed of, I need to lower the stigma, they get people just vehemently denying it because it's considered such a horrible disease. So now my basic life goal is to convince celebrities to come out as having herpes, which sounds a little silly. People are laughing, I get it, but it's all actually, I think, could legitimately, as ridiculous as it sounds, save lives. And we only know that because of this search data, kind of where people are confessing things that they'd never otherwise say. So that's kind of how I think about this data. There's so much power in this information we leave as we go through the internet to ultimately improve our lives, even save our lives. There's even a more direct example of this. Scientists have found you can predict that someone might have pancreatic cancer just based on the searches they make on the internet. So what they did is they looked at people who were diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and then they looked at the symptoms they searched in the months before the diagnosis. And they found really, really subtle patterns in the data that could predict in a couple months, this person's going to get a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. So for example, if you search indigestion followed by abdominal pain, that's a risk factor for pancreatic cancer. Abdominal pain by itself, followed by itself, or indigestion by itself, aren't as big risk factors for pancreatic cancer. And that's a really, really subtle pattern that could only be found because they had so many people in this data set searching all their symptoms. Everybody in this room probably at some point in their lives is searching their symptoms on Google or another search engine. And by mining all that, we can see these patterns that doctors didn't even know about. I feel really bad for the hypochondriacs in this audience. Because if you're anything like me, tonight you're going to be feeling indigestion followed by abdominal pain. But really, really important, and I think we're going to get, this whole discussion is going to get with some of the ethical issues, but obviously this raises some pretty big ethical issues for a search engine. What should a search engine do if it knows you might have a risk factor for pancreatic cancer? You can imagine on the Google search engine, it's such a friendly website. You have that little button that says, I feel lucky. Imagine if right under the I feel lucky button, you had in bright red letters, oh, you might have pancreatic cancer. Not the most friendly message from Google, but I think I think you should be able to opt in. I personally would want to know if they mined through millions of people making health conditions and knew that I had symptoms that suggested a disease, that knowing this I could improve my chances of survival. I'd want to know that. So definitely some of the ethical issues. Another area of research, racism. Yeah, all my research areas are really, really dark and depressing. Suicide, pancreatic cancer, racism, but I do think they're important. And the racism data, I started doing this research, so I'm from the United States, and I started doing this research in 2012. Barack Obama was president, and there was this idea, I don't know if you even remember that America had entered a post-racial age, that racism was the thing of the past. And of course, if you ask people, are you racist? What do you think Americans say? No, of course not. Not in a million years. I don't have this attitude. It's considered socially unacceptable to be racist. And I was shocked by how frequently Americans make racist searches on Google. They search for things like N-word jokes. You can imagine they're looking for jokes humiliating and mocking African Americans. millions of these searches every year, as common as searches for migraine and Economist and Lakers, a really common search in the United States, even though nobody's saying that they're racist. And I did this research, and when I was first doing it, it was considered a little insane. Like, you're going to understand racism from Google searches. That's not the way to understand it. But, and it kind of languished. It was ignored for a while. But then we recently had a presidential candidate in the United States who said some things that I and a lot of others were pretty racist. He started his campaign saying that Barack Obama, the first African-American president, probably wasn't born here, and he kept on retweeting false statistics about how much African-Americans commit crime, and he didn't repudiate support from the leader of the KKK. So he's doing all these things, and everyone said Donald Trump is going to collapse. You can't say these things in the United States. You can't be so racist and be a serious presidential candidate. And certainly if you ask people, they'd say, no, we don't support these types of attitudes. That's racist. We would never support that. And I had from my research this map of where racism is highest, where more people are making racist searches on Google. And I showed this to a journalist at the New York Times who had data on support for Donald Trump. He found that racist searches was the highest single predictor of support for Donald Trump in the Republican primary. Higher than economic variables, demographics, any sort of attitudes. The biggest predictor of support for Donald Trump in the Republican primary was people making racist searches on Google. So these people secretly in their own home, they're saying, I'm not racist. I have no problem with Barack Obama being with having a black president in the United States. But in the privacy of their own home, they're searching things like N-word jokes, and then they're allowing Donald Trump to rise, even though he said some things that I and others found so racist. All right, but can we do anything about racism and hate? So let's say we do have this window into people where people are so honest on Google and they're telling these dark secrets that they'd never tell anyone else. Could we ultimately change the world? Could we improve attitudes? Could we make people hate less? I think you can. So I'm going to discuss one final study that I did on hatred. And I studied anti-Muslim attitudes. So some people on Google, they make really, really nasty searches about Muslims. They search things like kill Muslims, I hate Muslims, Muslims must die. Really, really nasty searches. Almost why are they telling Google this? But they tend sometimes frequently make it late at night, 2, 3 in the morning. They're just really angry, it seems like. They're kind of enraged, and they type these strange, nasty thoughts into Google. And you might think, oh, who cares? These are such weird searches by obviously such weird, deranged people. Do we care that people are making these searches? We do. It turns out that when these searches are higher, when more people are searching kill Muslims, I hate Muslims, Muslims must die, these nasty searches, there are more hate crimes against Muslims, more assaults against Muslims, more mosques attacked, even sometimes Muslims killed. And in December 2015, I don't know if you guys remember, probably didn't get that much coverage in Australia. There was an attack in San Bernardino, California. 2 Muslim Americans shot and killed 14 people. And as soon as this attack happened, literally minutes after they announced the shooters' names, they had very Muslim-sounding names, there was an explosion of these nasty searches on Google. So people were searching in huge numbers, kill Muslims, I hate Muslims, Muslims must die, all these horrible, horrible searches in unprecedented numbers. So this was back in the day when Barack Obama was president. So we had a president who wanted to lower hate, not increase hate. And Barack Obama, I think, knew that attitudes against Muslims had gotten out of control in the United States. And he wanted to do something about this. So he decided to give a speech to the nation. And it was nationally televised. It got a lot of attention. And it was a speech all trying to lower these anti-Muslim attitudes, to make people stop feeling such anger and animosity towards Muslims. And it was kind of a classic Obama speech. If you know anything about Obama speaking, he tends to speak very well, very beautifully, very poetic. He talked about the responsibility we have as Americans not to give in to fear, to appeal to our freedom, the responsibility we have as Americans to love everybody, no matter their religious background, the responsibility we have as Americans to accept everyone into this country. And I thought it was one of the better speeches Obama had given. And everyone else seemed to agree with this, all the serious sources. The New York Times said it was a great speech. Newsweek said it was a great speech. LA Times said it was a great speech. The consensus was, great speech, Obama. You really did what you had to do to calm people down. So I looked. Google searches are broken down minute by minute. I looked what happened to these nasty searches about Muslims during and immediately after Obama's speech. And I found these nasty searches about Muslims. They didn't drop. They didn't stay the same. They went way up. So as Obama was saying, the responsibility we have not to give into fear, to love everybody, more people were searching, I hate Muslims. Muslims must die. Kill these Muslims. All these angry, angry people were seemingly getting more enraged. So that's kind of a sad conclusion. We'd like that a well-meaning speech by a well-meaning man actually seemed to backfire. But there was something that was maybe a little more optimistic about this speech. At the end of the speech, Obama gave a different line. He said, we have to remember that Muslim Americans are our friends and neighbors. They're our athletes, they're our sports heroes, and they're the men and women who will die for our country. And immediately after he gives this line, huge rise in searches, Muslim athletes, Muslim soldiers. In fact, for the first time in many years, the top descriptor of Muslims on Google wasn't Muslim extremists or Muslim terrorists, it was Muslim athletes followed by Muslim soldiers. These kept the top spots for days afterwards. And all around the internet, you see these young men, the demographic most at risk of having anti-Muslim attitudes and committing hate crimes. Young men are saying, they're saying on message boards, they're saying on Twitter, Shaquille O'Neal's a Muslim? Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is Muslim? Muhammad Ali's Muslim? They didn't know any of this, and they're trying to kind of reconcile in their mind, what does this mean? I thought of Muslim Americans as, I thought of Muslims as Osama bin Laden and these terrorists who had committed the crime. I didn't think of Shaquille O'Neal as a Muslim. So we published this finding in the New York Times, and we kind of suggested that there's one strategy that seems to not work. If you think of what didn't work, what made people more angry, it was every time Obama used words like responsibility or should. He lectured people. He told them what they should do, told them things they've been told 1,000 times. That seemed not to work. What might work a little better is provoking their curiosity, giving them new information, changing the way they think of this group that's causing them so much anger. And I think it's not crazy when you write a New York Times column that powerful people read it, maybe even someone in Obama's office. Because a few days later, Obama gave another speech about anti-Muslim attitudes. This time the speech was in a Baltimore mosque. And again, the speech got a lot of attention. Again, it was on national TV. But this time, Obama's strategy was totally different. He didn't use the word responsibility once. He didn't tell people what they should do. He didn't lecture people. Instead, he doubled down or quadrupled down on the curiosity strategy. He said we have to remember that Muslim Americans are friends and neighbors. They're farmers and merchants. They're athletes. They're entrepreneurs. They're Nobel Prize winners. The first mosque was built in North Dakota. Muslim Americans built the skyscrapers of Chicago. Thomas Jefferson had a copy of the Quran in his office. All this new information that might change how people thought of Muslim Americans and their role in our history. And I looked at the Google search data after this speech, in the minutes during and after this speech, and these anti-Muslim searches during this speech, they dropped. So I'm not saying from my two little studies that I've solved hatred in the world, that I've done what Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King Jr. and so many others failed to do. Obviously, a lot more work has to be done on these areas. But I think what that shows you is the power of this new internet data, the power of data science, the power of big data, that we have an unprecedented window into people's minds, even on really dark topics, even when they're saying things that we'd rather they weren't thinking or feeling. And we can turn something as seemingly chaotic as how to calm an angry mob into a real science. And I have 2 seconds left, so that's the best timed speech I've ever given. So usually I'm about 3 minutes early or 3 minutes late, but thank you.